morning, Woodland, 5th grade. All right, this is the big day. It's Wednesday, May 20th, 2020. Thrilled you're here with me this morning. Remember, tomorrow is field day. Yes, virtual field day. It's been set up. Gym teachers across the district have all these activities scheduled for all of you. Obviously, it's going to take a little preparation on your part today. So I have given some time in the schedule today. You'll notice that there are, ooh, look at this hair growing in. Holy mackerel. There is some time in the schedule, for instance, during social studies time today, unless you have to catch up on any work for me. Start planning. I plan on doing the same thing with my own son this morning and this afternoon, getting just things together for tomorrow. So this way I'm not just trying to grab things at the last minute. There are some supplies you'll probably need. So start getting that stuff together. Start putting it in a little bag, maybe one bag at a time. So this way you're ready to rock and roll tomorrow. Looks like the temperature will be around 70 degrees in the afternoon. So you might not be able to do the field day right away in the morning. You might have to wait till maybe about 10:30, 11:30 for the temperature to kind of warm up. But I think you'll enjoy the activities that the gym teachers have put together. So on that front, I will not be joining you until next Tuesday. Friday, we're off. Saturday, Sunday, of course. And then Monday is Memorial Day. So I will not see you any days from now until next Tuesday. All right. Big news in the jeans industry. Back in 1873, San Francisco businessman Levi Strauss and a tailor by the name of Jacob Davis, well, they received a patent for blue jeans with rivets. How cool is that? In 1927, Charles Lindbergh, well, he makes the infamous flight from New York to Paris. It became the first non-stop flight across the Atlantic Ocean. And in 1506, at approximately the age of 55, because at that time, very difficult to see when birth and death, when people were born and when they passed. On this day in 1506, Christopher Columbus dies. Birthdays today. Well, we've got two heavy hitters today. From Sonny and Cher, and now her own solo career, Cher, 74 years young. Wow. I Got You, Babe, Life After Love. Can't beat it. Feel free to play a little Cher this morning. And, we sang this song last year at our school play. Rachel Platten's fight song. Yes, Rachel Platten, 39 today. I thought she was younger. That was surprising to me. I thought that she was at least 29, 30, 31 in her early. I didn't realize that she was closer to my age. So Rachel Platten, of fight song fame. Feel free to play that one. That's always an uplifting one. She's 39 today. And that's all I have for you in the news front. Just a quick note, Google Meet this morning. Let's get the whole class in on math. There's 10 of you that I've identified that'll be meeting me at about 9:45. So come join me in the room at 9:45. And please have your Titanic podcasts ready to share. We had a good session yesterday. Everybody shared out about 2 each. 2 of the 4 each, so expect the same. Have it up on the screen, ready to rock and roll which ones you want to share. All right, let's get right down to it. We've got a solid 25, 30 minutes. We are on Chapter 12, tracking on Padlet. I see we've got a good crowd in the room. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Looks like we got about 14, 15 in the room, so good job this morning. Once again, if you didn't catch me live, make sure you definitely tune in each day to update Padlet, right? Every week I go along and make sure that on usually Saturday or Sunday, I usually go along and check to make sure that you're conforming to the schedule and updating it daily. Here we go. Let's go. With permission from Scholastic. Did it up front today. How about that? Remember. Chapter 12. Latitude 41 degrees north. Longitude 50 degrees west. Monday, April 15th, 1912, 2:20 a.m. Remember, it was only like 2.5 hours, right? All your research kind of showed that. From the minute that it hit to sinking. Imagine that. 2.5 hours. Alfie expected to be sucked down into the sinking ship. In actuality, he barely got his hair wet. The feeling of control disappeared the instant he was in the water. The cold was almost heat, as if he had been set on fire rather than submerged. A cry was torn from him, and he was shocked to realize that he could be making such a tortured sound. The same agonized wailing was coming from all around him, not loud or strident, but constant and penetrating. It rose from the ocean, meddling into an eerie symphony of suffering. Oh, wow. Read that line again. It rose from the ocean. So these cries for help, right? Melding into an eerie symphony of suffering. Without warning, Alfie was driven under the water by a force pressing down on his shoulders. Choking on seawater, he twisted to see a man of middle age holding on to him with desperate hands. "Help! Save me!" Alfie sputtered to the surface. "Stop it! You'll drown us both!" But the man was hysterical, teeth chattering from the cold. "I beg you!" He grabbed at Alfie again, wrapping one arm around the young steward's neck. Wheezing, Alfie did the only rational thing. He pushed the man off with all his might. It was as the terrified face veered away from him that Alfie realized the poor soul was wearing no life belt. He sank like a stone and never resurfaced. Did I kill him? Alfie thought. Or did I prevent him from killing me? He could not bring his half-frozen mind to focus on the question. He could only swim and pray. The Titanic's end was the most otherworldly thing Juliana had ever seen. One moment, the largest moving object ever built by man, shining like the sun, towered over the North Atlantic. The next, she was gone, as if she had never been there. The sea glassy calm over the place where she'd sunk out of sight. Across the water, the night air carried the keening sound of souls crying out in torment. The first reaction in boat 13 was disbelief. "My God!" exclaimed a woman, trying to hold her hands over her children's ears. "It's the people in the water," Juliana breathed in horror. "They're dying." "It sounds like hundreds of them," someone added. "Why aren't they in the lifeboats?" "I wouldn't know, ma'am," said the crewman in command. "I'm just an assistant purser. I couldn't tell you how many boats there are or how few." "We must go back," Juliana exclaimed suddenly. "We must pick up as many of those unfortunates as possible." The young crewman was surprised. "We're full to bursting, miss. We couldn't fit in so much as a toothpick without endangering ourselves." Juliana's voice rose along with the swell of the wailing sound. "These are our fathers, our brothers, our friends. Some of you have husbands left behind." "Not all the lifeboats are full up," offered a steerage lady. "Surely they'll try to help." Juliana peered desperately into the black velvet night. Where were the boats returning to pick up survivors? Where? Alfie never stopped swimming, as if he believed he could make it back to England if he simply applied himself. The cold was beyond imagining, nor was it anything a body became accustomed to. Each moment was more bone-chilling, more painful, more horrible than the one that came before. It was a deterioration that could only end in death. He had already passed many unconscious and bumped into more than one. The experience of looking into the blue complexions and staring, lifeless eyes would always be with him, he knew. For this reason, he was not shocked when he felt a jolt. But the object in front of him was much larger than a body and hard to touch. He squinted, straining for night sight, when the only light came from stars. A huge piece of furniture bobbed there. Dark wood, with shelving in small compartments. He grasped at a knob and a drawer pulled out in his hand, spilling multicolored birthday candles into the Black Sea. A pantry from one of the galleys. It must have been washed overboard when the Titanic split in two. To this frozen, drowning boy, it represented salvation. It was not until he tried to haul himself on top of it that he realized how much of his strength was gone. It took every ounce of his will to drag his sodden body onto the broad face of the massive kitchen unit. As he settled onto the shelving, he could hear a gurgling sound, seawater penetrating the compartments and cubbies. "No, I will not sink twice," he vowed, almost angry at the prospect of going down a second time. He began to pull out every drawer, every shelf, every hinged lid, jettisoning all excess weight. Canned goods, bags of flour, exotic spices, confectioner's sugar, wild rice. He dumped it all into the Atlantic. The one thing he saved was a glass jar of French bonbons. It would provide quick energy and, if the worst came to worst, a bailing bucket. At last, he lay there panting, soaking wet in the bitterly cold air, and actually felt warmer. He lay semi-conscious for a few moments, wondering about the wheeze he could hear deep in his chest. He was so far gone that, when he first heard the cries for help, he had almost forgotten where he was. Memory flooded back, and he knew one thing. If fate gave him the chance, he had to save as many people as humanly possible. He couldn't see the figure in the water, but he could make out the splashing of flailing arms. "Over here!" he croaked. With effort, he struggled up and reached out his hands to the floundering swimmer. Alfie was surprised by the power and the grip that locked onto his wrists. The man heaved and groaned, and the pantry listed dangerously. "Easy," Alfie urged. "You'll flip us." The swimmer calmed his movements, squirming onto the wood of the cabinet. Alfie hauled him into the indent, reestablished balance, sat down, exhausted. Utterly spent, his new passenger looked up and began to thank his rescuer. Alfie stared in disbelief. It was Masterson, Jack the Ripper. The debilitating fatigue in Masterson's eyes vanished, to be replaced by blazing rage. Somehow, the cripple found strength in his all but useless legs and launched himself at Alfie. A powerful arm locked around Alfie's torso, dragging him toward the side of the makeshift raft. The pantry lurched, sloshing water over both of them. Alfie retaliated, boxing the older man's ears with the heels of his hands. Like that. Masterson cried out, but squeezed harder. Breathless and desperate to break the suffocating grip, Alfie gouged at the man's eyes. With a bellow of fury, Masterson fell away. The storage cabinet heeled and took on another icy wave. Alfie scrambled up, his boots splashing in 3 inches of water. The pantry bobbed even lower, losing buoyancy as the sea lapped over on the side. "Stop it, you fool," Alfie barked. "You may kill me, but you're sinking yourself at the same time." "You'll not spoil my plans, boy," Masterson brayed. Neither of us has need of plans if we capsize." Something in Alfie's words must have penetrated to the murderer's addled brain, because Masterson backed away. Alfie, too, retreated from his enemy, moving carefully to keep the shaky craft in balance. He knew that, at the first opportunity, this evil beast would be upon him again. Masterson could not let him live, not as long as Alfie knew his terrible secret. The one thing keeping the young steward alive was the flimsiness of their life raft. The killer could not kill without sealing his own fate. In this precarious position, any attack by either combatant would be murder-suicide. "I should do it," Alfie thought suddenly. "It would be a good trade. I could save New York from Jack the Ripper. Maybe it doesn't hurt so much to drown." But he couldn't. Not while there was still an opportunity to be rescued. He felt a flush of shame. He was nobody. And he had no one now that Dow was gone. But life, even a slim chance at it, was precious, and he lacked the courage to do what needed to be done. Who knew how many young American women would be put in danger because of this cowardice of one English boy on this night of horror. A truce with Jack the Ripper. A deal with the devil. It's the end of that chapter. I'll give you a moment just to react. God, it's an itchy nose this morning. My goodness. Give you a moment just to react there. Okay, here we go. Chapter 13. Once again, latitude 41 degrees north, longitude 50 degrees west, right? They're just in the North Atlantic. You can't say aboard the Titanic anymore. You can't say aboard anything at this point. They're just sort of in a location. And that location is where the Titanic rests today. Monday, April 15th, 1912, 2:25 a.m. Patty hung off the side of the overturned collapsible and wondered why he would even bother doing such a futile thing. There must have been 30 men kneeling, sitting, and lying on the Ingleheart's bottom. There wasn't room for so much as a mouse, let alone a dying Irish boy. It was just about the fate he deserved, he supposed, after his heedlessness had gotten Daniel killed. Well, he'd be joining his friends soon enough. The icy water that surrounded him, almost up to his neck, made him so numb that he wasn't sure his legs were still there. The only feeling he had at all was in his hands, which clutched desperately to a cleat on the Engleheart. And what he felt was pain. No one could survive for long like this. The night was filled with the cries and moans of 1,500 people floating in their life belts. Yet with each passing minute, the chorus of agony grew quieter, the multitude of voices dwindling. They're dying, he says, he thinks, and me with them. What possible purpose could be served by this kind of torture? To prolong the suffering for a few more minutes? And then he thinks to himself, or I could just let go. Paddy had been living on borrowed time ever since he'd set foot out from his home in County Antrim for the cruel streets of Belfast. Well, now that debt was being called in. It seemed only fair. When the force struck him from above, it detached him from the boat, driving him underwater. The buoyancy of his lifebelt brought him back to the surface, and he found himself bobbing next to the man with the mustache who had denied him space on the upturned boat. The poor soul was stiff and staring, stone dead of exposure. The sudden drenching of his head seemed to restore the function of his brain. One dead man gone meant there was an empty space aboard. Paddy didn't cherish the idea of taking advantage of another person's misfortune. And then he thinks to himself, but if one more can be saved, it might as well be me. A moment before, he'd had zero energy left, no energy left. Now, he was scrambling, climbing, heaving himself into the hull. It was so crowded that he was crawling across men's legs, but no one complained. No one had the strength to. He found his place, not by choice, but at the moment when he could make it no farther. It was too crowded for him to collapse, so he just settled there like a jellyfish, wedged between two bodies. Keep still, came a sharp order from the man on his left. It wouldn't take much to upset this apple cart. Even in Paddy's depleted state, he could not help but recognize that voice. He looked up in dismay into the stern. Mr. Lightoller. Lightoller's eyes narrowed in recognition. You! Instinctively, Paddy glanced at the man's hands and pockets, searching for the second officer's gun. It was nowhere in sight, and even if Lightoller still had it, It was surely too wet to fire. But Patty realized the simple act of throwing his hated stowaway overboard would be as lethal as a bullet to his head. "Well, you did it, sir," Patty croaked. "You got me off your precious Titanic. I hope you're happy now." Lightoller stared at him in disbelief for a long moment. Then he nodded brusquely. "You're not a stowaway anymore, boy. The Titanic is gone, and you've as much right to your life as any of us. Besides, you're lucky, and we need to have a little bit of that on this night. Tell whatever angel is looking out for you to send a ship, and very soon, or there won't be anyone to rescue but corpses." Patty's teeth chattered. If this was luck, he pitied the poor fool who was unlucky. Shifting gears over to Sophie now. Sophie had been swimming forever, certain that frantic activity was the sole thing keeping her alive in the frigid water. She had watched from across the glassy, smooth sea as the mighty Titanic had broken in half like a child's toy and disappeared beneath the waves. She had struggled among the dead and dying, closing her mind to horror that was beyond comprehension, and yet all too real. To think was to die. Only in constant motion was there any chance at survival. But the lifeboats were so far away and moving even farther. Why weren't they coming back? Didn't they hear the howls of the people in the water? So focused she was on the distant boats that she almost missed the wooden object directly ahead. What was it? It wasn't a boat. And the Titanic didn't have life rafts, did it? She made up her mind. Whatever it was floating. And that was good enough for her. It had seemed to Sophie that she'd been swimming with strength and vigor. And she now realized that it had been an illusion. The floating object was no more than 40 feet away, yet it was taking her an awfully long time to get there. The strokes that felt so powerful were little more than pitiful flailing of an exhausted girl. She was right upon it, close enough to touch it. At last her hand felt something solid, and she grasped the wood with nerveless fingers, knowing that she might never muster the force it would take to climb on top of it. And suddenly, a figure was looming over the edge, reaching for her. "Thank you," she tried to say, but the sound didn't travel any farther than her own ears. And then, the hands, rather than bringing her aboard, closed around her throat. An iron grip began to squeeze. She already knew who her attacker was. Who else would try to commit murder now, in the midst of this gargantuan tragedy? She looked up through the darkness into the mad eyes of Jack the Ripper. She found her voice then, uttering a piercing shriek that sliced through the night. The grip tightened, cutting off her cry. She gasped for breath. There was none. Sophie, who had avoided drowning, would suffocate nonetheless at the hands of a ravening beast. She tried with her entire being to break his hold on her, digging her fingernails into his hands. It was of no use. His strength was too great, and hers was all but gone. The stars over the horizon blurred as her consciousness began to fall away. A heavy jar swung out over Masterson, shattering against the back of his head. Bonbons and glass shards rained down onto Sophie. The vice around her throat relaxed, and Masterson fell forward, unconscious, his face hanging over the side of the water. Another figure bent over her. "Alfie," she rasped. She had never in her life been so happy to see anyone. "Don't talk, Miss Sophie. Save your strength." He grasped her under her arms and tried to haul her aboard the floating pantry. Sophie realized that he was almost as weak as she was, and that she would have to help if she were ever to get out of the water. Somehow she managed to fling one leg over the side and then roll until she was on the pantry and laying flat. She was so completely spent, so cold, that she almost forgot the man who had been trying to kill her for the second time that night. With great effort, she raised herself up on her elbow. Masterson was still unconscious, his head trailing in the black water. He was most certainly drowned. Is he? She began. Alfie nodded. I think so. I don't cheer the death of any man, but in his case, I can make an exception. Sophie shuddered. Get him away, Alfie. I can't look at him. Just the thought of the horrible things he's done. Alfie leaned over and began to unfasten Masterson's life belt. When I was little, my mother used to tell me about him. She said I'll never sleep soundly in my bed until that monster is off the streets for good. He tossed the belt aside and pushed the body overboard, watching as Jack the Ripper splashed into the black water and sank out of sight. Sleep well, Mom. Wow. How about that? Huh? What a way to end that chapter. All right. Let's see if we get one more in. Let's see how long chapter 14 is. Let's see. I think we can do it. And then we'll end at page 109. Okay, here we go. So for those of you joining me, if I'm a little bit past 45, it's okay. We have plenty of time this morning. We have a good 45 minutes together. Chapter 14, RMS Carpathia, Monday, April 15th, 1912, 2:45 a.m. The wireless shack was unbearably cold. All the Carpathia was cold, and calls were coming in from shivering passengers. With full power to the engines and the ship steaming north, the temperature in their cabins had dropped 20 degrees. Is there any word? Asked Drazen anxiously. Marconi officer Cottam wore the headset, his expression growing grimmer by the moment. They had not heard from the sinking Titanic in almost an hour. Then the message had been, come as quickly as possible, old man. The engine room is filling up to the boilers. Nothing, was the reply. Of course, if the boilers are swamped, there's no steam for the dynamos. No power, no wireless. Drazen nodded soberly. He didn't believe it either. Are there any other ships coming? Yes, but we're the closest, and we're still at least an hour away. Drazen shuddered. He was afraid there would be very little left of the Titanic by the time the Carpathia got there. How long can people survive in the water? That water? Cottam was technically an employee of the Marconi Company and not a sailor, but he had worked in transatlantic shipping long enough to understand the lethal cold of the northern route. Only the salt and constant motion kept the sea from freezing solid. Minutes, maybe less. Chief Steward Harry Hughes appeared in the doorway of the wireless shack. Captain Rostron wants to see the boy. Let's give you a moment here to sort of get caught up. Okay. Drazen goggled. Me? Why? I don't question the captain's orders, Hughes replied. Certainly not at a time like this. He led the diplomat's son to the wheelhouse. The captain and several officers stood on the bridge, peering intently forward through binoculars. Below them, the foredeck was dotted with lookouts as well. Captain, I brought you the ambassador's son. Thank you, said Rostron briskly. We need every pair of eyes we can get. Drazen was still in the dark. But what are we looking for? The captain pointed off the starboard bow. That! A mountain appeared out of the darkness, illuminated by the ship's running lights. It towered 200 feet out of the water and radiated a blast of cold that was palpable even on this frigid night. Drazen was no seaman, and it took him a moment to recognize the immense shadow for what it was. Ice. Rostron nodded. And we'll only see more of it the farther north we get. Will you help us? The Carpathia had always seemed enormous to Drazen. Yet now he had a horrifying image of what would happen if the ship collided with a monster like the iceberg they were passing. the steamer would be nothing more than a thin scattering of broken Christmas tree ornaments floating on the vast ocean. Yes, of course, he promised. At that very instant, he caught a faint green flicker on the iceberg's bulk. Captain, I must be mistaken, but I saw it too, interrupted First Officer Dean. A green light, low on the horizon. A flare, Rostron exclaimed intently. Concentrate, gentlemen. We may not be too late after all. Someone on one of those lifeboats must have a flare gun. There's a gap now in the reading. It says, the flare caused a great stir of excitement on the overturned collapsible B. Hope lent verve to 30 debilitated and bone-weary survivors. Stiff bodies twisted in the direction of the green light. The motion set the upturned hull rocking, and icy waves washed over them. Panic added to the squirming, setting the unstable craft even further out of balance. Be still, bellowed Lightoller. But the flare, Patty exclaimed, his feeble voice brimming with hope. Is it a rescue ship? The mere mention of the magic word rescue had people scrambling for a better view. The next man who moves will be tossed overboard, roared the second officer. That is not a rescue ship. Nor will you live to see one if you scuttle us. He waited until the commotion died down, and then he continued in a lower tone. We are all afloat because of the upturned Engelhard has a pocket of air trapped beneath it. Every motion of the boat and the sea around it will shrink that pocket, causing our perch to sink a little further. I don't believe I need to tell you all what that means. When the air is gone, so shall we be. But there's a steamer nearby, came a protest from the stern. We all saw the flare. That flare was very close, Lightoller explained. It came from one of our own lifeboats. It was more than a sigh of disappointment. Patty could almost feel the life force ebbing from this forlorn group. If they lost the will to soldier on, they were surely doomed. Mr. Lightoller, Patty ventured, is there any hope for us at all? Several steamers answered our CQD, supplied a voice. It was hard to see Marconi operator Harold Bride, who was lying across the hull, buried by several other men. The Carpathia is the closest, he said. Carpathia? Lightoller pounced on this information. Tell me about her. Jack Phillips, Bride's superior in the wireless shack, raised a bedraggled head, his hair full of ice crystals. She's a wallowing scow with no speed to speak of, sir. She won't be here until the daybreak at soonest. Daybreak? Mourned a member of the galley staff. We'll be at the bottom of the sea long before then. I'm senior aboard this vessel, such as it is, Lightoller snapped. Hear me. There will be no dying without my permission. Our one job is to maintain our air pocket. And to do so, we have to maintain perfect balance. Do you imagine they're on this collapsible, this boat of some kind, and underneath them the air. It's almost like when you take a bottle of water, a glass, and then you try and stick it in water, right? And then there's like that pocket of air that's in there, right? You could take a bottle and just spray, but the minute that you tip it just at the right angle, it fills. So right now they have that pocket of air because this thing is upside down and they're all laying on it. So one wrong movement fills and this thing shall sink. As Patty watched in amazement, Lightoller organized everyone to stand in two ranks along the overturned hull. Only Bride, who was badly crushed and frostbitten, could not make it to his feet, and even he was placed in a strategic position along the central spine. Then, with Lightoller acting as boatswain, they bobbed into the night, according to the seasoned sailor's reading of the sea. Lean to the left, lean to the right, stand straight. Patty obeyed along with the others, sandwiched in frozen misery in the column of sodden, shivering bodies. He could not tear his eyes. He could not tear his eyes from the second officer. Charles Herbert Lightoller was inflexible, tyrannical, and the sourest man alive. But tonight, Light told her he was their last best hope. Man that tried to kill him and find him on board the Titanic all those days is now the man keeping him and everyone else on that not collapsible alive. All right, let's give just a 2-minute break in case you need to quickly grab a drink or use the bathroom. We will see you in just a few minutes. I'll open up the room. You can't get in until I activate it, until I'm in the room. So yesterday, some people were trying to get in. You can't get in unless I'm in there or Mrs. DeCarli's in there. So we'll see you in a few, guys. Again, I'm not on tomorrow. I'll see you next Tuesday at 9:10. We'll finish this book, and then it's just a couple weeks of school left. Hard to believe. Cheers, everyone.